recording. We do it. Listen, I feel like I should put on a special hat, a Where's Waldo hat or something to make it more interesting. All right, we're gonna start. I know that. Oh, it's always we'll start, but we'll go around the room just introducing ourselves, and then of course, like always, I take questions, but I'm gonna start with just something very brief on Hanukkah, and then we'll open it up to whatever discussions you'd like. So I guess we'll start with Judy.
It's my name.
Yeah,
Judy Rabbi
this way everyone gets to meet everyone.
from Boston.
All right, deal. We'll say where you were born. Deal. So Judy, Boston.
Couldn't tell. Huh?
All right, Barry, you're up.
Barry, St. Louis.
Alice, Kalamazoo, Michigan.
Kalamazoo.
Kalamazoo.
Pardon?
Did you say Kalamazoo?
Steve from Kalamazoo also.
My born in Orion, Mississippi, all the way to California.
Oh, nice.
Rita, Chicago.
Janie, New Jersey.
I'm Stan from Washington, DC.
Sally, St. Paul.
Marvin from upstate New York.
That's Connie's. Well, that's Connie's from Binghamton. All right.
And you
Levi from Phoenix. I was born right here. Exactly. I was born in Phoenix. Yeah, I'm a native. Because my parents moved here before I was born. Simple, right? What was that? 1977. Yeah, well, no, because I speak to people who were born here and they're in their 90s, Jewish. So that's a pioneer. I mean, my dad's a pioneer-ish. I was speaking to someone who's 90 years old, born in Phoenix. And he said that he never met a Jew until he was 15, but he was circumcised. Like his parents made sure he was circumcised. So they weren't living it, but that was important to him, which I thought was good to hear because you don't want to do that when you're 90.
Or 80, or 70.
Right. Well, we just look at the Bible, it talks about that. What were you saying? I didn't. I met her in Starbucks. I'm just joking. We'll talk about that afterwards. Deal? No, we were introduced. My good friend is her uncle, talk about large families. And so he introduced us. But I'll just open up a little bit about Hanukkah, and then I do, of course, encourage questions. One of the things that I like, and I always share this here, is that if you have a question that either you never thought of before, or you grew up in the Jewish circles and never felt comfortable asking, I think it's important that you always have that opportunity. So that's why I like the open parts of the discussion. But I do want to highlight one thing with Hanukkah that I think. I was speaking to Stan earlier, and he said that even in his circle of friends that he meets with in the morning, they all know the story of Hanukkah, not just the Jewish people. And I do believe that the Hanukkah story became very commercialized in a good way, that you can do Hanukkah openly and feel very comfortable about your Jewish identity. And that didn't happen by mistake. That took a lot of public menorah lightings and other things, not just one thing. But what I want to share is a lot of people know the story, very, very brief, simple, that the Greeks tried to impress upon the Jewish people their own ways and culture. At a certain point, there is a rabbi or a priest, actually, Matisyahu, the high priest, and he begins a revolt with his 5 children. They defeat the Greeks miraculously for the different reasons that we say it in the prayer, they were the weaker who overcame the mighty, the fewer that overcame the many. We have the different ways that we look at that. There was no reason why we should have won the war, but God provided that miracle. They come back to the temple, they want to light the menorah, and they do not find a single cruse of olive oil to light the menorah with. And they finally find one. Instead of it lasting for one night, it lasts for 8 days. The next year, they made it into a holiday. That's the basic gist that most of us know. And because of that, we eat foods that were fried in oil, latkes, donuts, fried ice cream, all this stuff. And then in addition, again, there's no rule on what you have. If you want to have a deep fried pastrami egg roll, just putting that out there. That's tomorrow, exactly. Tomorrow at our cooking presentation by Benita. That's Hanukkah-esque. And the reason why the foods came about was because I'm going to say by geographic location. So if you lived in Europe, they had a lot of potatoes. If you lived in the Middle East, they had a lot of flour. So their types of foods were dependent on what they had access to. We also play the dreidel. That's a newer thing. That's not from the original story. That came about much later. And part of that is that the miracle of Hanukkah was really something that, in addition to winning the war and rededicating the temple and putting the temple back into service, it was about the children. You can't win a war and about culture, and I'm going to explain what I mean in a moment. A war that someone was trying to impress a culture and take away God from the Jewish people, and then not educate your children about it. So education was a very big part of that, which included Hanukkah Gelt, that you gave money to your children to educate them on charity, believe it or not, and to celebrate their education. But today it became gifts, and that's its own beast. I mean, my wife and I were having a discussion yesterday about this. I didn't grow up with gifts. Like the way we had it was you got your Hanukkah Gelt over the holiday, and then you went to Toys R Us and bought something. I said we would get Hanukkah Gelt, money, like my father would give a certain amount each night, and people, uncles, whoever you saw that gave. And at the end of the holiday, we would go to Toys R Us and buy something ourselves. But Connie said, like, she grew up, her parents always gave her a gift, and it was very exciting for her. And so that's what we do with our children. And it's this constant, like, I don't want to say struggle or fight, but like it's a discussion. It's like, I don't want my children to move into what's culturally accepted today. I want them to get the gelt because that's really tradition, but not in a negative way. A gift is fine. You could teach these things as well through the gift. How do you do that? You reward them for good studies. You tell them to give charity through the gift, whether it's taking another toy out of their closet and donating it, or you give them two gifts and donating one, however you teach it. But it's really about education and charity. And so that's the basic gist that many people know. I want to share a little bit, an additional side to the Hanukkah story that maybe some of you know, but just one tiny detail, and that or maybe a couple details. Number one is the story of Hanukkah, although we know that it's a one-year event. In the year 140 before the Common Era, the Jewish people revolt, and in the year 139, they win, and in the year 138, it becomes a holiday. But really, in the year 301 is when the Greeks began the process of really impressing their culture, the Hellenistic ideas on the Jewish people. So it's a long story. That's 160 years. But it comes to a head when the king of the Greeks, his name is Antiochus or Antiochus, also known as a madman. He had a lot of people didn't like him, and for sure the Jews didn't like him. His goal was to take God away from the Jewish people. And that's why his decrees specifically targeted the types of mitzvot that we do because God said so. So that's really the real war is this. The real reason why this is a holiday, rather than just, hey, we won a war against the Greeks, is because what it meant and what we did when we won it. And that idea is he tried removing God, spirituality, that we do things because God said so, from the Jewish people. He said, listen, if it makes sense, do it. If it doesn't make sense, why are you doing it? And so his laws that he enacted, just to give you some examples, was no circumcision. Why do we circumcise an 8-day-old baby? For one reason, because God said so. There was no American Academy of Pediatrics that even said that there's like a 60% chance that maybe that's healthy. There wasn't any of that. We literally do it because God said so. And any mitzvah that they enacted, even study of Torah, that they said you cannot study the Torah anymore, was because why do we study the Torah? Not for science, even though there is science in the Torah. Not for history, even though there's history in the Torah. Not for anything other than it's God's Torah. And so that was another thing that they banned. And so eventually the Jewish people revolt. But what I want to share is how low did we go? And this is kind of what I really want to share. If you are familiar with the story of how the revolt begins, a group of soldiers come to a town. The town is called Modi'in. which today still exists in Israel.
Modi'in?
Modin, yeah, right outside of Jerusalem. It's about 40-minute drive, I think. And they erect an altar, they bring a pig, and they ask Matisyahu, the high priest at that time, to offer it as a sacrifice, right? They're smart. If we get the top guy, it's easy to get the rest. And of course, he refuses. But this is the point I want to share. Another guy volunteers. This other guy volunteers and says, I'll do it. Jewish guy. Matisyahu kills him, kills the soldiers, and then says, whoever is for God, follow me. And that is the beginning of the revolt. My point is like Jews had really their own struggles internally of this fight between remaining proudly Jewish and dropping it for cultural Judaism and doing cultural Greek stuff. Like, the body was important, competition. It wasn't spiritual in nature. So this was a real war for the soul of Judaism. That's really what I want to get to. It wasn't for the body of Judaism. Of course, when you come to war, it becomes for the body of Judaism. But this was really a soul fight. Where are we going to be tomorrow as Jews? Will there be Judaism tomorrow? And so I always think about that because, like, when you talk about, we could look at the problems of Judaism today. We could look at the problems of Judaism a couple hundred years ago. They're always the same. Someone is trying to remove the spiritual component of the Jewish people. And the truth is, like, without God and without the Torah, what are we? It's a question each of us should ask ourselves, not for the table. It's like, what does Judaism look like if I took away the God part of it? A culture? I mean, you could eat gefilte fish on Tuesday, right? What is it? And something that we should each identify in our own lives, and maybe that's a way that we make it a little bit more meaningful. And maybe that's the Hanukkah kind of internal part that we celebrate. It's like, listen, it's not just about lighting this menorah, but what can I do to increase in my own life a little bit of that light, the spiritual light? And so one of the questions that they always ask is, why did this become a holiday? Like, there are a lot of miracles in Jewish history that did not become holidays. So what was so special about this one? I'll just end on this point and then we can kind of open it up. And that is that we come to the temple and we don't find oil, is what we're told. But really, that's not the case. They actually do find oil. They just don't find oil that wasn't tampered with by the Greeks. They find a lot of oil. And that was really the Greeks' point. We don't have to pour out the oil. We just have to tamper with it because you light it because it's a spiritual commandment from God to light the menorah in the temple. But a menorah gives light. So what difference does it make what type of oil you use to make light? And so when the Jewish people come to the temple, they find plenty of oil. They don't find oil that has this message that we're doing it because God said so. And so the fascinating thing is, and this is what I think a lot of, I think about this, in Jewish tradition, not tradition, law, the temple's service had to be done in a state of ritual purity. So the Kohen, the Levites, and anyone else who would come on the Temple Mount had to make sure that they didn't come into contact with something that would make them ritually impure. The entire section of laws of ritual purity has no rational reason. It's because God said so. The easiest example that I can give for this is anyone who went through school and knows about the cooties. Yeah. The cooties is some kid goes over to you, taps you and says, you have the cooties. It's like, what the heck? And now you can't touch people. It's like, it's a made up thing. And so ritual purity is something that God gives to the Jewish people and says, I want you to be holy. Be aware of what you touch. Be aware of where you are. But it's not because if you touch it, you become dirty. You can't wash it off. You need to go through a purification process. Now, in times of war, those laws were actually shelved. And what I mean by that is in times of war, many people come into contact with ritual impurity because of necessity, whether it's taking care of dead bodies or whatever the reasons were. You come into contact with things that you can't know what their ritual state was. And so the law says that in the temple, in a time of ritual impurity, the service can be done ritually impure. And so the Jews knew this. In theory, they could have just lit that menorah. but they insisted on finding a small something of oil. They didn't care about the next day. They said, tonight we can put the menorah back into service. Let's find something that represents what we fought for. Let's find oil that wasn't ritually impure. And they search and search and search and finally find it. So this lighting of the menorah that night was a very big deal because it represented the victory. If they would have just used any oil, then the Greeks, even though they lost physically, their message was still winning. And so that's why this was such an important little miracle, because what does God do? Reciprocates with the love. We went all out to show that we cared about God. God reciprocates and says, you know what? I'm going to allow that menorah to remain lit until you can replenish that supply. Full stop. That's kind of the story of Hanukkah. But what I want to share is now a side note. In true Jewish fashion, there are a lot of opinions of how they lit that menorah, right? So they know that they have oil for the first night, but there is a commentary and many commentaries that ask, did they use all the oil on the first night or did they ration it out over 8 nights, knowing that it would take 8 days to replenish the supply? And so one of the answers, which is the one that we all know, is like that night they used all the oil and it lasted for 8 days. There's another opinion that says that they actually did ration it out for 8 nights. So each night there was a tiny amount put into the oil cups and it still lasted 24 hours. Now, why do I share this answer? Because there is a beautiful question asked about Hanukkah that an entire book was written about. And it is one question. And that question is, what is like the book is called My Hanukkah. Why do we celebrate on the first night? The miracle is only 7 nights. My Hanukkah is the text of the Talmud. Like, what is Hanukkah about? Why are we celebrating this? So there's a question, what happened on the first night that makes it a miracle? Nothing. The first night they had oil. So if we say that they put all the oil on the first night, there's no miracle the first night. The miracle begins on the second night. But if we say that the first night was also a miracle, then what's the miracle that we're celebrating? And this has a book with over 100 answers. And so one of the answers that they bring is what I just shared about the oil, that even on the first night, there was a miracle of oil because they only put a tiny amount and it lasted 24 hours. It should have lasted maybe 3 hours or 2 hours. If to do the math on that, 3 hours is probably the right number. So that's one answer. Another answer is we're celebrating the miracle of finding the oil. That was a miracle. Another answer is we're celebrating the miracle of the war. We won a war. Like, don't forget about that. So there are a lot of different answers to this question. I just share that as a side note. Again, over 100 answers to that question.
So what is the true answer?
Man,
In your opinion.
I'm going
In your
to,
opinion.
I'm leaving. I don't know. I mean, I think there's a beautiful thing that we say, okay, because we don't know.
No.
I mean,
It's left up to
I mean, the traditional answer that most people for the first night, like I think most people have grown up with that we use the entire oil the first night. And so the first night explanation for the miracle of the first night is winning the war. But again, I don't say that with, when you teach children, you oversimplify it. I grew up in the oversimplified class, which was the oil lasted 8 days. And so the question was, why are we celebrating the first night? And the answer, the war. But then as you get older, it's like, well, there's nuance and teachings. I've shared this with nothing to do with Hanukkah, but somebody once asked me this question, and it's a good question. It says, we talk about what revolves around what when you talk about science, planets, sun, and earth. In science, you say that everything revolves around the sun. In Jewish texts, it says everything revolves around the earth. And so that's a big problem. Like, how do you reconcile? Right? Well, so when you grow up in a religious school, they just say, we follow the Jewish way. They don't start addressing these questions. They don't even educate you on the other side. And if it's a really diehard school, they took those pages out of the science book, okay? But that's not how it works. Maybe. I remember in high school, my biology book did not have the section on sex. The pages were cut out. We knew it all. We didn't need a science book to teach you. But my point is they were like shielding us, right? But every kid knows this stuff. But it's a Jewish school and they want to make sure they're not going to educate it to you on paper. You learned it in the Talmud, believe it or not. You learned it in the Torah. I mean, you learned about affairs in the Torah. You don't have to go farther than the story of Judah. And he's one of this, it's a story that's coming up. He has a child that is married to a woman. They don't want to have kids. So God punishes. What do you mean they don't want to have kids? Instead of completing the act within her, he makes sure to finish outside of her, right? God punishes him. The next son marries this woman because that's the law of the levirate marriage. Same thing happens. She's a beautiful girl. They don't want to make her pregnant. Punishment again from God. He dies. So now Judah tells the third son, you ain't marrying her. She kills people, right? Well, at the end of the story, if you're familiar with this, Judah, not knowing who she is, ends up seeing a prostitute and has relation with her, and she gets pregnant. And so what does he do? This is, remember, honor killings. She is not allowed to marry someone out of the family, right? Because the law of the levirate marriage says that someone in the family should be marrying her. All he knows is she got pregnant. So my point is not to go further into that. That's a digression. You don't need a science book to learn about all this stuff. That's what I was getting at.
On the first night,
Yeah, everyone agrees there was a miracle on the first night. That's for sure. That's for sure. But my point to come back to that is when you study, for example, with the Earth and the Sun and the planets, I spoke to a scientist. She's a Jewish professor at Harvard, used to live in Flagstaff, moved to Phoenix. And I said, hey, I was doing a discussion. There was a guy from Michigan that would come every year, and this bothered him. He would make fun of the idea of Judaism because look what Judaism says and look what science says. Clearly, science is right. Judaism is wrong. And how can you even believe the rest of the stuff? That was his line. And so I asked her, I said, I'm just curious, you're religious, you're observant. How do you reconcile scientific differences with the Torah? And so she says, what are you talking about? So I tell her this exact example. So she says, it's not a problem. I said, what do you mean it's not a problem? So she said, it's all about perspective. In anything that's orbiting, each is orbiting around each other. And so if I want to look from the perspective of the sun, everything's turning around the sun, but they're both turning. And so I said, so wait a second, if that's true, why don't they teach that? I went to science in high school and in elementary school. I've never heard that in my life. Like it makes sense to me, right? The logic of it makes sense. So she said, it's very simple. When you are a younger child, we teach you with a simpler mindset. But if you would start studying that in college, that's an automatic. Two orbits, they're all orbiting. So from which perspective are you looking at it? And obviously there's a deeper teaching there. What is the epicenter of your life? What's the purpose of creation? The world. So everything revolves around the earth. That's Jewish perspective. But it wouldn't be right to say that the sun is not in one orbit. The sun, I mean, it depends how you look. So I appreciated that always, not just for that answer, but for this as well. The idea is that we study in Hebrew school one way, or in elementary school, or in a Jewish day school, but there's a lot more layers. There's a line that maybe many of you have heard. There are 70 faces to the Torah. In Hebrew, it's Shivim Panim La Torah. There has to be one answer that makes sense on its most basic, right? And in an event that we don't have the exact, this is what happened, then we can speculate all day long. But we know that the traditional answer is that they used all the oil that night. But if you want to understand why the first night is celebrated, you have to start coming up with other answers. So I will share, and then I'll move away from that. In Rashi, the commentary on the Torah, at times he gives multiple explanations to something. And so the question is always asked, why is he giving two answers or three answers? And so the answer that's always shared is the first answer is the best answer, which is why he put it first. But he had a question on it, like something maybe slightly bothered him, so he added a second answer. But the second answer has more questions. That's kind of how you have to look at it. But anyways, point is regardless, the oil lasted for 8 days. Bless you. So now I come back to you were going to ask a question, or you were? Okay, go for it.
My question is, why did Hanukkah move from more of a minor holiday to a major holiday?
Oh, Christmas.
All right. Well, first of all, okay. Well, first of all, I like that question always, and I'm going to give a different answer than that. I'm going to share that answer too, right? The common answer is like Christmas became so big, and Jews felt like we weren't getting the same type of a holiday, and you could feel, I'm going to say, very minimized and like not feel important. And it's like, wait, we have a better holiday. It's 8 days of presents, and it made Jewish children very proud. But
Is it not a festival and not a holiday?
well, in Hebrew, it's called the holiday of Hanukkah. I know when you say Chag, which is holiday, can be translated in many different ways. So the festival of Hanukkah, maybe because it's multiple days, I don't know. Festival of lights. But to answer your question, when Hanukkah was given as a holiday, it was given as a 8-day holiday, but each night you would only light one candle. So on night 1 was one candle, on night 7 was one candle. But the rabbis, when they said it, how you celebrate, they gave you a second option. You could do it a better way, and every day you add a candle. Again, there was an opinion that said remove a candle, but the answer that was accepted, and it says that every single Jewish person accepted it that way, meaning we all saw how important the holiday was, and we wanted to do it in a nicer, more proper, and celebratory manner, which was we'll add a candle each night. So it really was always a big holiday, but it got commercialized is the word I'll use. And that's definitely over the last 30, 40 years. So,
Oh, that is.
yeah, I think if I can say, I mean, the public menorah lightings was a very big part of that. Like we made it big. We put menorahs on public property. People should see it. It shouldn't just be in your home. That definitely made it much larger than, but that's not the only thing. It's one of the things. And then you had people who had businesses and started cashing in on it. Wrapping paper, what's the mensch on a bench? Exactly. Yeah, so it became a thing, but the truth is, and that's why I shared in the beginning, it's like if we really want to keep it from not being commercialized in our own home, then our question is like, what was the fight about? Let's really talk about it for a moment and try to impress that in our own life, or at least in the messaging, right? So if you're having a Hanukkah party and you're going to give a little l'chaim before everyone enjoys or in the middle, like what should your message be about? Should it be about light and darkness being overcome by a little match, which is a beautiful thing, but yes, but in a spiritual sense, you just need to do one mitzvah and that can shine an entire room or an entire life. That's really the messaging, right? One tiny candle dispels all that darkness. You want to add something on that?
I just wanted to say that, my family and I had to think about holidays, quote holidays. That these holidays are only commemorations. Celebration should be all the time. This beautiful talk you gave about how one should feel about Hanukkah should be present every day. So that the time of Hanukkah becomes a commemoration and you celebrate the idea of
All right.
Hanukkah and other holidays every day.
So that I like that. It's like Thanksgiving. I tell people it's like we think every day, and they needed a calendar reminder. I don't know.
How do we celebrate? My wife and I talk. How do we celebrate our anniversary? It's not only the anniversary; it's every day.
So how do you do
The
it?
anniversary is simply commemoration.
Right. I like that. It's a good classification of the day itself. But by the way, there is something to that, and then I'm going to take your point or your question. When you talk about the high holidays, it says that the spirit and blessings and spiritual aspect of the high holidays should really take you throughout the whole year. So it's like bucketfuls and bucketfuls of blessings that you should now have from the high holiday season, not Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur exclusively, but Sukkot, Simchat Torah, that you can now use throughout your entire year. That's like the most important part of it. But do we do that? I mean, we have to have the mindset. That's on the daily part, right? But I do like that. Like, I don't know how, it's not easy. It's probably the hardest thing. I don't know. Do you know what I mean? To actually put that into effect is not easy. Not on the anniversary part, on the Jewish part. The waking up, every day and seeing your wife or however each person, that is its own reminder. But with holidays, we don't see the candles every day. So it's like much more difficult.
Here,
So that's why I said it's much more difficult. Like, do you put a menorah in front of you and a Seder plate and so every day you remember to, it's definitely harder work. But I do like that. I mean, there's definitely a spiritual uh, truth to that we talk about, not just, I mean, it's a nice point.
No.
Every day your family is still alive.
Right.
That's why you say it's Thursday in the morning.
He did it true.
Right.
What?
I mean, the truth is, and then I'm gonna cut back to you. There is a prayer. Like we don't take things for granted until we lack them. That's the fact.
Until we what?
Until we lack it. Right. So the same thing is with like the Hanukkah story. We had to lack something to appreciate something, but we don't want to learn that way, right? Sometimes that's the way we learn because we were forced to not have it, but we definitely don't want to rely on that idea. We want to be more proactive rather than reactive. That's a reactive. Anyways, go for it.
So this is, maybe for you a little controversial.
I'll tell you.
Um, For 7 years, I worked with children through Jewish Family Children's Service. None of them were Jewish. They were from all parts of life, but I never had a Jewish child. And the first year, when it was Hanukkah, I brought in a menorah and candles and gelt and dreidels, the whole bit, and did for them a complete session on Hanukkah. But the message.
Right, teaching them.
And then we had a round table in the room, and then I said, well, I'm gonna teach you a game. And I taught them dreidel. And everybody had a cheat sheet of what the letters were.
Right.
And at one point, everybody's two hands were on the table. And the gelt was there, the dreidels were there. And I took out my phone and I took a picture of that. And I still have that picture of all different colored hands around the table with the menorah and the
dreidels.
dreidel and the gelt.
I don't think it's controversial at all. I will share that you did what the Hanukkah story says we're supposed to do. So to go back for one little detail on Hanukkah, there's a comedian that has a really funny routine about Christmas and Hanukkah, and I think it's Elon Gold. So just to quote who it is, he says that, can you imagine if Christmas had the same regulations and rules like Hanukkah? The placement of the tree has to be in the right side of the room. The height can't be shorter than 2 feet. But it can't be higher than 100 feet. You only light the lights on the tree after 5 p.m. He like goes through this whole thing, and people get the gist, because if you look at the Hanukkah story, we have a lot of rules of how to light the menorah, and I'm just going to share them very quickly. The menorah cannot be too low on the ground, and it cannot be too tall. It is too tall.
It should be awesome.
I'm getting to all these details, right? It should be lit that, well, I'm getting to it. Right? It used to be lit outside of your courtyards of your house. Eventually it was moved inside because of persecution and safety. So to the window, and then eventually even more inside. But I'm ignoring that for a moment. It can only be lit in the evening, and it has to remain lit from, let's say, dusk to nightfall. So it's about 40 minutes, 35 minutes. There are a lot of rules. And how late can you light it? Like, what's the latest at night that you can light it? What's the earliest you can light it if you can't do it at dusk? But maybe I could do it a little earlier, right? So meaning these are the questions. We have a lot of rules, but why are there all these rules? They weren't put there so that our lives should be miserable, which is what a lot of people think the rabbis were trying to do. They're there for one simple reason. Why were we told to light the menorah? To spread the miracle story of Hanukkah. And so if I'm spreading the story The menorah has to be visible. So too tall or too short would preclude that, would exclude that, right? You wouldn't be able to, you don't see it, so no one would see it. If you light it too early, well, the miracle happened in the evening, and you want people to see those candles. And so because of that, the menorah lighting's proper time is just about when nightfall begins, which is, we're going to say, at dusk, but it should light until nightfall. Now, if you come home late from work or you're traveling, how late can I light it? Well, the question is, are there going to be people who will see it? So are there still people on the streets or not? Let's say I came home 2 a.m., no one's on the street. Can I still light it with a blessing, by the way? Right? Because for a mitzvah with a blessing. And so what's the answer to that? Well, is there someone up in your household? Right? There has to be an other. So all these rules are because the miracle is about spreading the miracle. So when you light a menorah or you educate, you're teaching something much greater. But again, the goal is to teach not just the story, but the depth, the deeper meaning that religious persecution, God, that God will prevail. However you teach that, light will overcome darkness, whatever message you're taking from Hanukkah. Be proud of who you are. I mean, there are a lot of messages. And so I think that's a beautiful thing. That is part of the purpose of the Hanukkah story. Now, obviously, the mitzvah is on Hanukkah. So if I did that 2 weeks before, it's a nice thing, but it's not a mitzvah. But it is education, and education teaches people to appreciate and accept others for who they are. Yeah.
Just to tell you about that, where I'm from, my neighborhood is commercial downtown. The Chabad puts up a menorah made of Lego. It's about 5 feet high and has oil cups. And it's quite a crowd comes for lightings.
For the Lego menorah.
Yeah, most
right.
of the crowd is not Jewish.
Right.
It's crowd.
No, I get it. It's a public now, like you see that a lot of public. I've seen, just to add to that, I've seen alcohol menorahs where the tubes are bourbon or something, and there's spouts at the bottom. So during the party, you can kind of. You've never. We need one here, right?
That's commercial. That's commercial.
It's real. This is in England. I saw it. I'm saying, like, people come up with like gimmicky ways to make people enjoy it. But I like the Lego one. I've seen that, and they do a toy drive for children with the like. There's different ways that people make their party hip but meaningful for people to come. Like, everyone's looking for a gimmick. What's going to get a crowd here? And I was speaking to somebody a couple days ago because we were talking about, like, in Arizona, you get crowds at public menorah lightings, and it was Vegas. I was speaking to somebody who lives in Vegas, and he's like, "Oh, our public menorah lightings don't get big crowds." And I don't know why, but in Arizona they get big crowds. So there's a lot. What's the gimmick? Is there a giveaway? Is there people are trying to get this crowd? But the idea, of course, is to celebrate the miracle, make Jewish people proud of their holidays and of their identity. And in this present moment of time, that's even more important.
Well, a relative of mine had a cactus.
Oh, is that your relative?
Mhm.
But I heard the cactus died.
It did.
Yeah.
They sold the house. The new people were Jewish.
They were Jewish?
Kept up the tradition.
Did anyone here go to that cactus? It was like it was always in the Jewish news. They would say, every night this family would bring out donuts and
She'd make sufganiyot.
it wasn't real fire. They just turned on the lights, But yeah.
Next time. Rather than do, years, he did it in my house and paid him, irritated and shade, and he had a cactus outside his house. It was right down the road.
Was it the same house? Did your brother move?
I drove moved about 6 years now.
Maybe this is the house.
Was it Ellen Benton now?
Yeah, my twin brother.
Oh.
Anyway, so he had.
Small world, right?
Yeah.
So I'm married to Gary Weiss. My daughter is married to Gary Weiss.
Yeah, okay, that's a marriage.
Yeah. So you guys are talking about the same house.
So he had, I'll be honest.
Right. That's what we were just saying.
I think people coming.
Oh, they would pay
I think so, the guy from North China.
Yeah, this is the house.
They fix the lights.
So this is his twin brother.
And so forth, and one night they took the shower.
Mel, your twin's in there. She has a picture of it.
When back to Thomas candle, right? That's what they-
Right.
Now, you don't know that should go out every night, or that should be burned every night.
Okay, great question. But are you asking specifically about, Mel, are you asking specifically on an electric menorah or any menorah? Okay. All right, great question. I'm going to repeat it. When you have a menorah, we have 8 candles, and then there's a 9th candle, which we call the servant candle or the shamash. That candle is there for 2 reasons. One is you don't want to take something that is holy, already used for a mitzvah, and use it for something that's, I'm going to say, not a mitzvah. So I don't want to take a menorah candle and light the rest of the menorah candles. So we have a 9th candle that's not part of the menorah. It's just a servant's candle. The second thing, though, is, and I want to kind of use the olden days so you kind of get a better understanding of this. Today we have beautiful lights in every home. But if I lived in a home 1600s, 1700s, I was candle lit. My room was lit up through candles. And so, and of course, even earlier, all of a sudden you light a menorah and you have so much more light. And so naturally you benefit from the light. But this is holy, so it's a mitzvah. You shouldn't be personally benefiting off of a mitzvah. So in order to kind of make sure that you weren't benefiting from the candles itself, we added one more candle and said, if I was reading and I got more light, it's from that 9th candle or from the 2nd candle, right? Depending on the night. But that's the point of it. So if you have, like in my home, everyone lights a menorah. So I could have 4 menorahs lit or 5. You only need 1 shamash, right? So if I didn't want to put a shamash on each menorah, that's fine. Of course, like your kids might want their own shamash, but in theory, 1 is enough. So like in yeshiva, I'm going to use that as a good example. Some people have a lot of fun with their menorahs in yeshiva. Instead of like using oil cups, they take beer bottles, fill it with water, and put an oil at the top, and you put it outside your dorm room, and all the different types of menorahs that come up at people's doors because they didn't have a menorah, they're not home. So basically, you might have 5 people in a dorm room or 3 people, depending on how large the room is. You might have 1 shamash because only 1 guy brought candles. You know what I mean? It's like they're not thinking like adults, they're thinking like teenagers. So they're just, oh, you have a candle, great. But that's really 1 is enough because its purpose is served through that 1 candle. And in theory, in yeshiva,
Yeah.
I had my own shamash. But I was in Argentina. I remember like it was people had a lot of fun with that.
You keep the shines. Or.
Okay, so now coming back to your question, I actually didn't answer it. The shamash itself remains lit until it extinguishes. It's a candle. So if it lasts for 40 minutes, great. If it lasts for 2 hours, great. But it doesn't have to remain lit the entire night. It serves 1 purpose. I will share something, a side note. When Jimmy Carter was president, they brought a menorah to him. It was during the Iran affair, and he was very, it wasn't a good moment in his presidency. And he wanted to light, they brought a menorah to light, the Chanukah celebration. And he insisted on lighting all the candles. He's like, we need light. It was Chabad that brought it to him. And so they wrote a report afterwards to the Rabbi about it. They brought it to the president, whatever else. And he was very not happy that they allowed him to light all the candles. Like, the Jewish tradition is tonight was, let's say, night number 3 or whatever it was. And I don't know what night it was. There's a very famous picture of this lighting. It's a beautiful little menorah, not too tall, but we have to still be proud of who we are. No, this is how we do it, not that way. So, but I get the sentiments, like who's going to tell the president not to? So it was like a critical, yeah.
I think that's true. I think you need to educate the person.
He knew what was, he just wanted more light. They basically said, this every candle dispels darkness. He was in a very dark place. And so he said, let's add more light. He took the message to heart. That's kind of how I look at that story, but just a side note. It had no purpose, just digressing here. Yeah.
Something a little bit bad about how when you light the candles, somebody else has to see it. Well, if you live all alone.
Right. They don't have to see it, but it has to be during a window of time that there are people who could see it. So let's say it's very late, early morning, like 2 a.m. where there's really no one on the streets anymore. There is a certain time of night where we say, okay, now people are home. In the Talmud, they speak specifically about a group of people that were very late at night and would only come home, let's say 11 o'clock at night, whatever night time it was. And so once those people were already home, you shouldn't light your menorah with a blessing. So what would you do? Well, if someone was up at home, you could do it. So for you, for example, let's say you are single, you come home really late at night. Should you do it with a blessing or not? Well, you look at the time, maybe you see neighbors up, whatever it is, you just want to know that someone's up. But if not, you wouldn't do it with a blessing. You'd still do the lighting. You don't do a blessing. Let's say I forgot altogether. I went to sleep early, I forgot. Let's say you didn't light it at all. The next morning you light the candles, you just don't do a blessing. So that's the idea. Blessing would be only if it's in its right time window.
That brings up a subject we were discussing in yesterday's talk about all of the Jew hatred that's going on in the world and not wanting to display our Judaism in the front window. And that came up at the very end and we didn't really discuss it much. But I was curious how many people would display Jewish things in their home for others to see. Personally, I live alone, so I wouldn't do anything to call attention to myself. But I have a window gel menorah that I put in my back.
Like the backyard.
I face the desert, so, you know, there shouldn't be anybody walking through the cacti there, but, and then I have a display on the counter, and then another display in the dining room. But you can't see it from the street. I display my protected by sign with the security camera, and that's what.
What does it say? Protected by my mezuzah? Right.
Sorry.
No, it's a good question. I think a lot of people struggle with your question.
Bert has a blow up Santa, and then she has a blow up menorah and a bench on a bench.
Well, they both should be a band.
Maybe it's a blended family.
They're two neighbors, they're not one family. But it's like the menorah is right next to the neighbor's Santa Claus.
Right. I mean, I think this is a good question. I used to visit, this woman has since passed, but when I first started visiting her at Ranch Estates, she was still afraid from her days in Philadelphia to really put anything outside of her apartment, which is very common in these communities. There's usually a little kind of table next to your door, and you can put anything you want, whether it's frogs because you're into frogs, or menorah, a wreath, whatever you're trying to put during that season. And she wouldn't put out her menorah. And 3 years later, probably, she started putting her menorah outside, which was a big deal because I know what her trauma, if I could call it that. But others don't have that. So I think each person to their own. I just was a presentation here earlier today, and they said that older people are more afraid of anti-Semitism. Younger people are less afraid, which was a very interesting statistic. I don't have the slides. I didn't take pictures of slides. Well, but the lady who was presenting was saying something interesting. She's like, her kids, who are the younger people who don't worry about it, are seeing more anti-Semitism than she's seen in her lifetime. Public schools, I mean, this is where they're feeling it, and they're not worried about it. I thought it was a very interesting little detail. So again, it's data. We have to trust the data as its own question. I have questions on their data, but they all, but that's their data. The younger people are not. Right. Yeah, but I don't know that older people are living in fear. Like living in fear means you don't come out. You don't go to the Jewish program. And there is that too. That was in their study as well. But
There are different levels of fear.
right.
Fear or no fear. My brother had no fear, he didn't care.
Yeah, but now times have changed.
This is not that long ago. In fact,
October 7th is 2 years ago. That's when a lot changed.
He sold his house and bought the house. I've been a Jewish person. He did the same thing too. He kept it going. But now the kind of.
Right.
The people are gone now. But, and then they had a very small following. Then every year got 100 people up there.
Huge.
After a while.
Wow.
My sister-in-law would pass on cookies and so on. It was a nice thing, that was very big.
Yeah, I mean, I know that this question, by the way, is a question that will last forever. Like some people are more afraid of public.
Like she said about in wartime, all of the rules can go out the window. And frankly, we're in war. This being Jewish in this environment, you know,
I will tell you that I haven't changed how I looked. I'm meaning like I know that there's a question. People are very, well, are you going to wear a hat now because you're that's not my worry, but I know about the question. So I don't minimize it.
One of the nice things about the menorah lighting, and I don't remember their name, but there's an order of nuns who wear light blue,
yeah,
and you know who I mean?
yeah, they were from a Holocaust.
Yeah. But they came in force.
As like to show their support for Judaism. That's very nice.
Yeah, they do.
Now go to these public things, but I don't want to display it in my window.
Were you interviewed for their study? I was just checking, I'm saying, because they had they had like a detail, like they'll go to a public thing but won't display it in another space. This study that was done by the JFNA. It was just interesting. Like you literally touched on two things that they had in their statistics. Yeah.
So I had the menorah by the window and we were ahead. And my husband at that time said, well, maybe we shouldn't do it. I said, no.
Let's do a bigger one.
Right. I purposely set it
Right.
up more. And it was kids that did it. They thought it was one of, I mean,
Right.
they didn't I don't think they realized what they really did. But then I've done it ever since and nothing ever.
Right. I think that each person, kind of makes the decisions on their own, and then slowly you either grow and say, I'm comfortable with this regardless. If you start thinking about your kids, do you want to show fair? There's a lot of like different parts to that conversation, but
But the whole purpose of the holiday is freedom of religion.
correct. But again, remember, like throughout our history, eventually they moved that menorah inside because they were afraid of the persecute. If you lived in Nazi Germany and you put your menorah in your window, exactly. Or what? Maybe before those stories happened, you were identified for Kristallnacht immediately, right?
Right.
So we know why this has changed over time. But if we're being very honest, America is right now the safest country to be Jewish openly, more than throughout our history. I mean, of course, you could do that in Israel. Don't get me wrong. I'm saying outside of Israel. So we have to take advantage and make sure we don't lose that. That's kind of how I look at that. Yeah.
Inside the apartment, you see it outside.
Right. And there are people who kind of disguise mezuzahs. They want it outside, but they make it look like something else. I've seen that. Every person has to do what they're comfortable with. You can't change someone's fear. You can just reassure them that they're normal. That's kind of
I always have, so on all the exits and entrances.
and that you're comfortable with.
That's how I was raised, and I am very comfortable with.
Interesting. But the menorah, like that's interesting. I mean, the menorah is definitely a bigger, right. No, you'll have to grapple with that one now.
This first, like, not even know what a Moses is.
Probably not.
Probably not.
That's. Anybody know, they're gonna put what's that?
Right.
Exactly.
I agree.
It's pretty.
Yeah, what's that ornament? Yeah. Oh, a doorbell. It's a doorbell. It's not working, but it's a doorbell. Right? That's like the idea. But I'll just end off on one interesting little going back to Hanukkah for a second. Historically. So we win the war. I read this yesterday, and so that's why I share this. I thought it was very interesting. So George Washington wins the war. He's the general. 1783, he has a meeting. Congress is not really kind to the soldiers. And there's a thought that maybe he's going to take over the government. By the way, in my U.S. history classes, I don't remember this. I read it in an article yesterday. And what does he do instead? He says goodbye to all of his soldiers and officers and goes back to his fields, goes back to do whatever he did before that. But in theory, in every other country, the army takes over. So you have the power now, you can do whatever you want. But they said, no, we have proper governors, proper governance. And so he goes back to his farm. In the story of Hanukkah, that's not what they do. So the high priests were never kings. And so in theory, right after the war, they should hand the keys over to the country back to the kings, back to the family of Judah, the descendants. But they don't do that. And so it says that the Hashmonaim, as we pronounce it in Hebrew, now rule over Israel for generations until the year 36, when the last Hashmonaim descendant is killed. So their entire family is wiped out. Is that a punishment for them not doing that? I'm not going into all the Jewish parts of that, but the last ruler of their family is killed by Herod, and then Herod becomes the emperor or king of Judea by the Romans, and he is the one that we know a lot of the current structures that you find in Israel were built by him. He was very into architecture. There's specific stones that they point to and say, okay, that's a Herod built building, like the Cave of the Patriarchs, even the Western Wall. Yeah. So he was very into that. And so he did a lot of building in Israel. But it was 102 years that the Hashmonaim family or dynasty lives after the story of Hanukkah, and then they're gone. But there was a female queen. Her name was Shalom Tzion in Hebrew. In English, she was Queen Salome Alexandra. She ruled for 9 years. She puts the rabbis back into power. Now, what does it mean she puts the rabbis back into power? If you think about it, if you are taking power and you don't belong in power, you kill the people who disagree with you. And so the rabbis are the voice that some of those other kings are like, wait a second. They're saying we don't belong as the king. Let's get rid of their voice. So she doesn't do that. She says, no, we're going to put the rabbis, we're going to let them teach, do their thing. She only lasts for 9 years. And then civil war breaks out between two brothers. They are the ones who bring in the Romans. They're the ones who say, well, if I want to win, I need some extra support. Let me call Rome. And the other one says, if I want to win, let me call Rome. And that is the entrance of the Roman rulership or rulers over the Jewish people, which will eventually destroy the temple in the year 70 of the Common Era. So about 100 years later. So I just share that. That is the story of Hanukkah and the history beyond it. Any last questions?
What'd you get for Hanukkah?
What do you want? You didn't give me your list.
Left, right, to left. The candles is left to right to left.
Okay, for the classic question that's asked every year. How do you light the menorah? Gets so confusing because people say left, right, and it really does get confusing. The menorah is lit on the right side of the menorah when you face it. So I am sharing that. You start on the right side, but you always light the newest candle first. So instead of using left and right, I'm going to say that the newest candle is always lit first, and then you go towards your right. So on the first night, it's the branch all the way to the right. On the second night, it's the second one and then the first one. 3, 2, 1, 4, 3, 2, 1. So instead of saying right to left and left to right, I just say the newest candle first, but you always start on the right side.
So as the nights go by, you do it from 3 to like 8,
right,
7.
exactly.
6. Okay.
So, and by the way, if you've done it wrong all these years until now, don't worry about it, because the mitzvah was to light a candle, and so you fulfill the mitzvah.
Oh, no, from left to right.
Yeah.
I lighted the first, but I see it that way, but the people.
Yeah, but so you have to decide what the direction of your menorah is. That's it.
It's about you, it's not about
Well, you
them.
don't like it. Well, it doesn't make a difference to you.
Yeah.
Right there. Oh,
Yeah. So if you're doing that, you can.
Didn't so.
Right. There's no rules on that. You do whatever you're comfortable with.
Fine.